Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. My grandmother used to tell me about the Bone Lady when I was 7 years old, sitting on the rickety porch of her cabin in Beckley, West Virginia. She'd rock back and forth in that ancient chair, smoking her Lucky Strikes and watching the tree line like something might emerge from the darkening hollers. "She ain't like the other spirits, Caleb," Grandma would say, her weathered fingers drumming against the porch rail. "The Bone Lady walks these mountains when the fog rolls thick. You can see her ribs through her dress, white as winter birch, and her eye sockets." She'd pause, taking a long drag. "Empty as mine shafts." I thought it was just mountain superstition back then. Small-town folklore meant to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods after sunset. But that was before I moved to Colwood, before I started working as a paramedic for McDowell County Emergency Services, and before I learned that some stories your elders tell you aren't meant to entertain. They're meant to prepare you. Colwood sits in the belly of Appalachian coal country, where Highway 52 winds through valleys so narrow the sun disappears by 4 in the afternoon. It's the kind of place where 3 generations of families have worked the same mines, where everyone knows your business before you do, and where the local diner, Bertha's Kitchen, still serves coffee in those heavy white mugs that could stop a bullet. I ended up here after my divorce finalized in Charleston. Needed somewhere quiet to rebuild. Somewhere my ex-wife's lawyer couldn't track down every dollar I earned. The county was desperate for paramedics after the last one transferred to Huntington, claiming he couldn't handle the unusual call volume. I figured rural medicine would be straightforward. Heart attacks, farming accidents, maybe the occasional overdose. What I didn't expect was Chief Dispatcher Hazel Vance pulling me aside on my first day, sliding a folded piece of paper across her metal desk like she was passing state secrets. "These are the protocols," she said, her voice carrying that particular Appalachian accent that turns vowels into music. "Official ones are in your manual. These..." She tapped the paper with one finger. "These keep you breathing." The paper was photocopied so many times the text had started to blur, but I could still make out 7 numbered items written in someone's careful handwriting. At the top, someone had scrawled in red ink, "Appalachian County EMS Supplemental Guidelines." "Ma'am, I don't understand." "You will." Hazel leaned back in her chair, studying my face like she was reading tea leaves. "This county's got history, son. Old history. The kind that doesn't care about your EMT certification or your fancy ambulance equipment. You follow those rules. You come home every night. You ignore them." She shrugged. "Well, we'll be posting another job opening." I tucked the paper into my uniform pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. Outside, Ambulance 47, a 2019 Ford E350 that had seen better days, waited in the bay, its red and blue lights reflecting off the concrete walls. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of learning that some emergency calls in these mountains don't follow normal medical protocols, and that the Bone Lady my grandmother warned me about wasn't just a story after all. My first real test came on a Tuesday evening when the October fog rolled down from the ridgeline like spilled milk. I was restocking supplies in the ambulance bay when the radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, respond to 1247 Laurel Fork Road. Elderly female, difficulty breathing. Be advised. Caller states patient refuses to go outside after dark." I grabbed my gear bag and keys, muscle memory from 5 years working Charleston Metro kicking in. Laurel Fork Road wound up into the hollers past the old company houses, where coal families had lived since the 1920s. The GPS on my phone showed nothing but green wilderness beyond mile marker 12. The drive took 20 minutes on roads that twisted like fishing line. My headlights carved through fog so thick I had to drop down to 30 miles per hour. Ancient oak trees pressed close to the asphalt, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the early evening sky. When I finally found 1247, it was a single-story frame house with aluminum siding and a front porch held up by cinder blocks. A middle-aged woman in a Walmart vest waited by the mailbox, waving a flashlight. "Thank God you're here," she said as I climbed out of the ambulance. "I'm Ghana Simpkins. It's my mother, Evelyn. She's having one of her spells again, but she won't let me take her to the hospital." I followed Donna up the gravel driveway, noting how she kept glancing toward the tree line. "What kind of spells?" "Chest pains, shortness of breath. Started about an hour ago, right when the sun went down." Dama stopped at the front steps. "But here's the thing. Mama says she can't leave the house tonight. Says it ain't safe." Inside, I found Evelyn Simpkins sitting in a lazy boy recliner, oxygen concentrator humming beside her chair. She was maybe 75, with silver hair pinned back and hands that showed decades of hard work. But her eyes were sharp, watching me with the kind of intelligence that cuts through mountain fog. "You the new paramedic?" she asked, her breathing labored but steady. "Yes, ma'am. Caleb Morrison." I set my gear bag down and pulled out the blood pressure cuff. "Your daughter says you're having chest pain. Pain comes and goes. Been dealing with it for 40 years. Evelyn studied my face while I wrapped the cuff around her arm. "You look familiar. What's your people?" Grandmother was a Morrison from Beckley, lived up on Bolt Mountain. Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. "Ruby Morrison?" "Yes, ma'am. Ruby was good people, knew the old ways." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "You got that paper Hazel gave you?" I paused, stethoscope halfway to her chest. "How did you? Rule number 4, son." Read it. My hands found the folded paper in my uniform pocket. I glanced at it a few times but hadn't committed it to memory yet. Under the fluorescent kitchen lights spilling into the living room, I read Rule 4 aloud. "If a patient refuses transport after sunset and mentions seeing movement in the tree line, respect their decision. Some nights, staying inside is the only medicine that matters." Evelyn nodded. "Your grandmother taught you anything about these mountains?" "Stories. Folklore." I checked her pulse. Slightly elevated but regular. Nothing I took seriously. "Tonight you might want to start." Evelyn gestured toward the front window with a gnarled finger. "Look out there. Tell me what you see." I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. At first, just darkness and the pale circles of my ambulance's parking lights. Then, maybe 50 yards into the woods, something white shifted between the trees. It moved wrong, too tall, too angular, like a scarecrow trying to walk. "Probably just a deer," I said, but my mouth had gone dry. "Deer don't walk on 2 legs," Donna whispered from the doorway, "and they don't have bones showing through their skin." I looked again. The white shape had moved closer, now maybe 30 yards from the house. In the ambient light from my ambulance, I could make out what looked like a woman in a tattered dress. But where her face should have been, dark hollows stared back. And yes, I could see the outline of ribs through the fabric, white as bleached driftwood. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "Language," Evelyn scolded mildly. "The bone lady don't care much for blasphemy." I backed away from the window, my training warring with what I'd just witnessed. Every medical protocol said I should transport this patient to McDowell County Hospital. Her vitals suggested possible cardiac issues that needed evaluation. But Rule 4 echoed in my mind, along with my grandmother's voice, empty as mine shafts. "Mrs. Simpkins, I need to take you to the hospital. Your symptoms will be here tomorrow morning, same as they've been for 40 years. Evelyn reached over and patted my hand. "But if you make me leave this house tonight, neither one of us will see sunrise." Through the window, I heard something that might have been wind through dry leaves, or might have been breathing. The white figure had moved again, now standing at the edge of the front yard, motionless as a tombstone. "What does she want?" I asked. "Company," Evelyn said simply. "Been walking these hollers for near a century, looking for folks foolish enough to wander the woods after dark. Your grandmother ever tell you about the mine collapse of 1924? I shook my head. 27 men trapped underground for 6 days. When they finally dug them out, only bones remained. But something else came up from that mine shaft, something that had been feeding on darkness for longer than memory." Evelyn's breathing had settled somewhat. "She's been hunting these mountains ever since." Outside, my radio squawked. "Unit 47, status update?" I keyed the microphone with trembling fingers. "Patient stable, refusing transport. We'll monitor through the night and reassess in the morning." The white figure in the yard turned toward the sound of my voice, and for just a moment, I swear I saw her smile. I spent that entire night in the Simpkins' living room, checking Evelyn's vitals every hour while we waited for dawn. The bone lady remained in the front yard until around 3 in the morning, sometimes standing still as a fence post, other times pacing the perimeter like a predator testing boundaries. "She can't come inside," Evelyn explained during one of her more lucid moments. "Houses built before 1950 still carry the old protections. Salt in the foundation mortar, iron nails blessed by traveling preachers, rowan wood in the door frames." When the first pale light crept over Buck Mountain, the figure simply melted back into the treeline. I blinked hard, wondering if exhaustion had finally gotten to me. But Donna confirmed what I'd seen. "Happens about once a month," she said, brewing coffee in the kitchen, "usually when the fog's thick enough to hide movement." By 7 a.m., Evelyn's breathing had normalized and her chest pain had subsided. I transported her to McDowell County Hospital anyway, where Dr. Patricia Welsh, a transplant from Pittsburgh who'd been practicing mountain medicine for 15 years, ran a full cardiac workup. "Vitals are stable," Dr. Welsh told me as we reviewed the EKG results. "Whatever episode she had last night seems to have resolved. Doctor, can I ask you something?" I kept my voice low. "Do you know anything about local folklore? Stories about things in the woods?" Dr. Welsh paused, studying my face. "You've been talking to Hazel. She gave me some supplemental guidelines. Follow them." Dr. Welsh's tone carried weight I hadn't expected. "I've been practicing here long enough to know that some patients present with symptoms that don't fit textbook diagnoses. Mountain medicine requires flexibility." That afternoon, I drove back to the station and found Hazel waiting with a fresh pot of coffee and a manila folder. "Heard you had an interesting first night," she said, settling into her desk chair. "Evelyn Simpkins has been calling for EMT assistance during Bone Lady sightings for 3 years running. You handled it right." "Hazel, what the hell is really going on in this county?" She opened the folder and spread out a collection of incident reports, some dating back to the 1980s. McDowell County sits on old coal seams, but it sits on older things too. Cherokee called this area Kitua Atsila, the place where spirits gather. Mining operations disturbed things that should have stayed buried. I scanned the reports: missing hikers, unexplained livestock deaths, emergency calls where patients described seeing figures in the woods, all clustered around the same geographical areas. the deep hollers where mining had gone deepest. The Bone Lady ain't the only thing wandering these mountains, Hazel continued. That's why we have 7 rules instead of standard protocols. Each one addresses a specific situation you might encounter. Show me the rest. She pointed to the paper I'd been carrying. Rule 1, never respond alone to calls on Witch Hazel Ridge after midnight. Rule 2, if a patient claims their reflection is missing, transport immediately. Don't look in mirrors yourself. Rule 3, when entering abandoned mining structures, carry steel, not aluminum equipment. My hands shook slightly as I read. This sounds insane. Sanity's a luxury we can't afford up here. Hazel pulled out a thermos and poured coffee into 2 mugs. You want to hear about the time Deputy Frank Booth ignored Rule 6? I nodded, settling into the folding chair across from her desk. 2 summers ago, we got a call about a missing child up on Panther Creek. 8-year-old boy named Tommy Vance, my nephew. Family was camping when he wandered off during the thunderstorm. Hazel's voice carried the weight of personal loss. Frank took the search and rescue team up there around 10 p.m., figuring they could use the darkness to spot flashlight signals. She paused, taking a long sip of coffee. Rule 6 says never conduct search operations in the woods during electrical storms. Not because of lightning, because of what the lightning attracts. Frank thought it was superstitious nonsense. What happened? Search team found Tommy the next morning, safe and sound in a cave about half a mile from camp. Kid said a nice lady made of light had led him to shelter when the storm hit. But Frank... Hazel shook her head. Frank never came out of those woods. They found his body. They found his uniform, folded neat as you please on a tree stump, like he'd just decided to take a midnight swim. His radio, his weapon, his boots, everything except Frank. Hazel met my eyes. Tommy described the lady to his mother, said she looked like she was made of electricity, with hair that moved like live wires. I thought about the white figure I'd seen the night before, the way it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Are you telling me these things are real? I'm telling you that mountain folk have survived in these hollers for 200 years by paying attention to patterns the outside world calls folklore. Hazel gathered up the incident reports. Your grandmother knew. Most of the old families know. The question is whether you're smart enough to listen. That evening, I drove home to my rented trailer on Laurel Creek Road, mind racing with everything I'd learned. The trailer park sat in a clearing surrounded by second-growth forest, the kind of place where rent was cheap and neighbors minded their own business. I was heating up a frozen dinner when my phone rang. Unknown local number. This is Caleb. Paramedic Morrison. The voice was young, female, scared. This is Jenny Hatfield. I live up on Cow Creek Road. My grandfather's having breathing problems, but... She hesitated. There's something else. What kind of something else? He keeps saying his reflection ain't in the mirror. Says it disappeared around supper time. Jenny's voice dropped to a whisper. Rule 2, right? That's what my grandmother told me to tell you. Rule 2. I grabbed my keys and gear bag, adrenaline flooding my system. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep your grandfather away from mirrors until I arrive. There's one more thing, Jenny said before I could hang up. He keeps asking for someone named Ruby Morrison. Says she's the only one who can help him now. The phone went dead, leaving me staring at my reflection in the black kitchen window. For just a moment, I could have sworn the figure looking back at me wasn't quite right. The eyes too hollow, the smile too wide. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, my grandmother's warnings echoing in my memory. Some stories your elders tell you aren't meant to entertain. They're meant to prepare you. And in McDowell County, preparation might be the only thing standing between me and whatever had taken Frank Booth into the woods 2 summers ago. The drive to Cow Creek Road would take me through some of the deepest hollers in the county, where the old coal seams ran closest to the surface and the Cherokee spirit still walked among the living. I just hoped Rule 2 would be enough to get us all through the night. Cow Creek Road twisted through terrain so steep my ears popped twice during the climb. The Hatfield place sat at the end of a gravel driveway that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. A single porch light cast a yellow circle in the darkness, and I could see Jenny waiting by the front steps. She looked maybe 19, with the kind of thin build that came from stretching food stamps and the worn clothes that marked her as coal country poor. But her eyes held intelligence and worry in equal measure. "Thank God," she said as I grabbed my gear. "Papa's getting worse. Started asking for your grandmother about an hour ago. Keeps saying she's the only one who understands about mirrors." "How long has his reflection been missing?" "Since around 6:30, right after he finished his cornbread and milk." Jenny led me up wooden steps that creaked under our weight. Mima always said it was a bad sign when mirrors stopped working right. Inside, the house smelled like old wood smoke and fried potatoes. The living room held mismatched furniture that had seen decades of use: a plaid couch with duct-taped cushions, a coffee table made from a tree stump, family photos covering every available wall space. Most of the pictures showed the same weathered faces across generations, coal dust permanently etched into the creases around their eyes. "He's in the back bedroom," Jenny said. "I covered all the mirrors with bedsheets like Meemaw taught me, but he keeps trying to pull them down." The bedroom was small and cramped, dominated by a hospital bed that looked out of place among the antique furniture. Elmer Hatfield sat propped up against pillows, oxygen cannula in his nose, but his attention was focused on a mirror across the room. Someone had draped a floral bedsheet over it, but the corner had been pulled away. "You Ruby's boy?" he asked as I approached the bed. His voice carried the rasp of decades smoking Marlboro Reds, but his eyes were sharp. "Her grandson, Caleb Morrison." Ruby Morrison knew about the mirror people. Elmer gestured toward the covered mirror. "Told my daddy about them back in '73, when the mine accident started getting strange. I began checking his vitals. Pulse elevated but steady, blood pressure higher than normal, respiration labored but not critically so." "Mr. Hatfield, when did you first notice your reflection was gone?" "Right after I looked in the bathroom mirror to wash up for supper. Saw myself fine, then blinked, and nothing. Just empty glass looking back." Elmer grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "But here's the thing, son. Something else was looking out from where my reflection should have been." Jenny appeared in the doorway. "Papa, you need to let the paramedic do his job." "This is his job," Elmer insisted. "Ruby Morrison's grandson didn't come up here by accident. The mountains called in here, same as they called his grandmother." I finished the examination and pulled out my radio. "Unit 47 to dispatch." "Go ahead, Unit 47. Requesting permission to transport elderly male, possible cardiac event. Patient also presenting with unusual symptoms related to Rule 2. There was a pause before Hazel responded. "Copy that. Transport authorized to McDowell County. Be advised, Dr. Welsh is standing by and has been briefed on Rule 2 protocols." As I prepared the stretcher, Elmer continued talking. "Your grandmother came up here when I was just a boy. Coal company had been digging new shafts up on Devil's Backbone, and miners started reporting strange things. Reflections that moved wrong, shadows that fell uphill, voices calling from empty tunnels." "What did she find?" "That some veins of coal ain't meant to be disturbed. The Cherokee knew it, marked certain areas as forbidden. But coal companies don't read Cherokee warnings." Elmer allowed me to help him onto the stretcher. Ruby figured out that when you break through into the deep places, sometimes things follow you back to the surface. Jenny walked alongside us as I wheeled the stretcher toward the ambulance. "Papa, what happened to the miners who lost their reflections?" "Most of them disappeared within a week, just vanished from their beds at night, leaving nothing but empty clothes and cold sheets." Elmer's breathing was becoming more labored with the exertion, but a few of them came back. I loaded him into the ambulance and began the drive down to McDowell County Hospital. In the rearview mirror, I could see Elmer staring at the ceiling, refusing to look at the small mirror mounted above the patient compartment. "Mr. Hatfield, what do you mean they came back?" "Walking around town like nothing happened, going to work, eating dinner with their families, except they cast no reflection, and their eyes..." He paused, struggling for breath. Their eyes looked like mine shafts, deep and empty and wrong. 20 minutes later, I wheeled Elmer through the emergency room doors where Dr. Welsh waited with a team I didn't recognize. Instead of the usual ER nurses, these looked like hospital security, and they moved with purpose that suggested this wasn't their first rule. 2 case. "Room 7, Dr. Welsh directed, leading us down a hallway I'd never seen before. "It's specially prepared." Room 7 was unlike any hospital room I'd encountered. The walls were painted flat black, and every reflective surface had been covered or removed. Even the 4th pole was made of dull aluminum that wouldn't hold a reflection. "Mr. Hatfield, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw in your reflection before it disappeared," Dr. Welsh said as the security team positioned themselves by the door. "Wasn't what I saw, Doc. Was what saw me." Elmer's voice was getting weaker. "Something with my face, but not my eyes. Something that smiled when I frowned, that nodded when I shook my head." Dr. Welsh made notes on a chart. "How long between losing your reflection and calling for transport?" "Maybe 3 hours." "Good. We have time." She turned to me. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand what you're about to witness. Rule 2 exists because mirrors in this county sometimes become doorways. When someone loses their reflection, it means something from the other side has taken their place and is trying to cross over." "Cross over to what?" "Our world. Our reality." Dr. Welsh checked her watch. "The process takes approximately 6 hours from initial displacement. We have maybe 90 minutes before Mr. Hatfield's doppelganger attempts to complete the crossing." Through the room's small window, I could see fog rolling down from the mountains, thicker than it had been earlier. In the distance, lightning flickered without thunder, the kind of electrical activity that meant the barrier between worlds was wearing thin. What happens if it succeeds? The real Mr. Hatfield dies, and something else takes his place. Something that looks like him, sounds like him, but serves different masters. Dr. Welsh pulled out a small mirror from her coat pocket, no bigger than a compact. "We're going to try something your grandmother developed back in the 70s. She held the mirror at an angle where Elmer could see it without looking directly at his own reflection. In the small surface, I could see something that made my stomach lurch. Where Elmer's face should have been, another face looked back, similar but wrong, with eyes like empty wells and a smile that seemed to have too many teeth. "There you are," Dr. Welsh murmured. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to hold this mirror steady while I prepare the countermeasure." My hands shook as I took the mirror. The thing wearing Elmer's face turned its attention to me, and for a moment I felt like I was falling into those empty eye sockets. It mouthed words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "Let me through. Let me cross over. Let me take his place." "Don't listen to it," Dr. Welsh warned, pulling out what looked like a small welding torch. "Mr. Hatfield, this is going to feel strange, But I need you to stare directly into this mirror while I apply heat to the reflective surface. Will it hurt? The thing that's stolen your reflection. Yes. You'll feel some discomfort, but nothing permanent. Dr. Welsh ignited the torch and held the flame against the back of the mirror. The surface began to smoke, and the false Elmer in the reflection started writhing, its mouth open in what must have been a scream. The real Elmer gasped and clutched his chest, but nodded for her to continue. The mirror grew hot in my hands, almost too hot to hold. The doppelganger's image began to distort, stretching and twisting like heated plastic. Then, suddenly, it snapped back into normal proportions, and I was looking at Elmer's real reflection again. "It's done," Dr. Welsh said, extinguishing the torch. "Mr. Hatfield, look into the mirror now." Elmer turned his head and smiled at his own reflection, which smiled back in perfect synchronization. Well, I'll be damned. Ruby Morrison's grandson really does know the old ways. Outside, the storm that had been building all evening finally broke, sending rain against the windows in sheets. But the lightning had stopped, and the fog was beginning to lift from the mountains. I helped Dr. Welsh clean up the equipment while the security team escorted Elmer to a regular room for observation. "Doctor, how many times have you done this procedure?" "More than I care to count. McDowell County averages about 6 Rule 2 cases per year." She paused at the door. "Your grandmother developed this technique after studying Cherokee purification rituals. Heat disrupts the connection between dimensions, forces the displaced entities back where they belong. And if we'd been too late? Then tomorrow morning, something wearing Elmer Hatfield's face would have gone home to his granddaughter, and the real Elmer would have been trapped forever in a world where everything is reversed, where up is down, where good is evil, where the dead walk among the living." I thought about Deputy Frank Booth, whose uniform had been found folded neatly on a tree stump. "Dr. Welsh, what about Rule 6? The deputy who disappeared during the lightning storm." Her expression darkened. "Some rules, Mr. Morrison, exist because we've learned the hard way that certain mistakes can't be undone. Frank Booth didn't just ignore Rule 6. He created a situation where following any rule became pointless. The implications of that statement followed me all the way home through the rain-soaked mountains, where every lightning flash seemed to illuminate shapes moving between the trees. 3 weeks passed without incident. I responded to standard calls: chest pains at the Dairy Queen, a broken ankle at the high school football game, an overdose behind the Exxon station on Route 52. Normal emergencies that followed normal protocols. I started thinking maybe I'd seen the worst of what McDowell County had to offer. Then Hazel called me at home on a Thursday night. "We got a situation up on Witch Hazel Ridge," she said without preamble. "Multiple missing persons. State police are requesting EMT support for the search operation." I glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. "Hazel, Rule 1 says..." "I know what Rule 1 says, but sometimes rules get broken whether we like it or not." Her voice carried exhaustion and something that might have been fear. "State Trooper Amanda Burke's already up there with a team. She's new, from Morgantown. Doesn't understand about local protocols." I pulled on my uniform and drove toward Witch Hazel Ridge, taking the switchback road that climbed through stands of birch and maple. The ridge got its name from the dense clusters of witch hazel that bloomed there every autumn, creating a golden canopy that locals said could be seen from 3 counties away. At the trailhead, I found a cluster of police vehicles and a search command post that looked like something from a disaster movie. Trooper Burke stood near a folding table covered with topographical maps, coordinating radio traffic with teams already in the field. She was maybe 35, with the kind of crisp professional bearing that marked her as career law enforcement from a larger city. When she saw me approaching, she waved me over with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Paramedic Morrison? Good. We've got 3 missing hikers, last seen around 9 p.m. near the old logging trails. Family reported them overdue when they didn't return to camp. Ma'am, I need to inform you about local protocols. I've been briefed on the folklore. Right now, I'm more concerned with finding 3 college kids before hypothermia sets in. Burke pointed to positions marked on the map. Teams Alpha and Bravo are sweeping the eastern slopes. I need you with Team Charlie on the north face. I tried once more. Trooper Burke, Rule 1 exists for safety reasons. These mountains after midnight are just mountains, Paramedic Morrison. Dark, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But I don't make operational decisions based on ghost stories. Burke's tone carried finality. Team Charlie departs in 10 minutes. Team Charlie consisted of Deputy Wayne Mullins, a local who looked deeply unhappy about the whole situation, and 2 volunteer firefighters from Logan County who'd driven over to help with the search. We hiked up the main trail using headlamps and handheld spotlights, calling the missing hikers' names every few minutes. "This is a mistake," Deputy Mullins muttered as we climbed. "Witch Hazel Ridge after midnight is bad enough. During a new moon, we might as well paint targets on our backs." "What's special about new moons?" asked one of the volunteers, a kid named Tyler who couldn't have been older than 20. "Less light means more shadows. More shadows means more places for things to hide." Mullins paused to check his radio. "My grandfather used to trap these ridges. Said the trees up here remember things they shouldn't." We'd been hiking for maybe 40 minutes when we found the first sign of the missing hikers, a backpack hanging from a low branch about 20 feet off the trail. Tyler started toward it, but Mullins grabbed his arm. "Don't touch it, not yet." Mullins swept his flashlight beam around the surrounding trees. "Something's wrong about how it's positioned. Too neat, too obvious." He was right. The backpack hung exactly at eye level, like someone had placed it there as a marker. But marker for what? "Team Charlie to command," I radioed. "We've found evidence of the missing party approximately half a mile north of the trailhead. Investigating." "Copy, Team Charlie." Any sign of the hikers themselves. Before I could answer, we heard voices calling from deeper in the woods. Not distressed calls for help, but conversational tones, like people having a casual discussion. The voices seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. "That's them," Tyler said, starting toward the sound. "Hey, over here! We're search and rescue!" The voices stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of wind through bare branches. "Something's not right," Mullins said. He pulled out his sidearm, keeping it low but ready. "Those voices, they were too clear. Sound doesn't carry that way in these woods." We followed the direction where the voices had seemed strongest, moving carefully through undergrowth that should have been nearly impassable in the dark. But the path ahead of us was clear, as if something had recently passed through, breaking branches and flattening vegetation. After another 10 minutes of hiking, we found them. 3 figures sat around a small campfire in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. The fire burned without smoke, casting light that seemed to bend wrong, creating shadows that fell uphill and overlapped in ways that hurt to look at directly. "There they are," Tyler said, relief obvious in his voice. He started forward, but I caught his sleeve. The 3 figures looked like college kids, 2 guys and a girl, maybe 19 or 20 years old. They wore the kind of outdoor gear you'd expect from weekend hikers, but they sat perfectly still, staring into the fire without blinking, and when the light hit their faces at the right angle, I could see through them to the trees behind. "Team Charlie to command," I whispered into my radio. "We've located a missing party. Be advised. We're going to need additional resources." "What kind of additional resources?" I looked at Mullins, who was backing slowly away from the clearing. "The kind that aren't in the standard operating manual." One of the figures around the fire turned toward us. Its face was the right shape and size to be human, but the features kept shifting, like looking at someone through water. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Join us," it said. "The fire is warm. The night is cold. Join us." Tyler took a step toward the clearing. "Guys, we've been looking for you. Your families are worried sick." "Tyler, stop," Mullins hissed. "Look at their feet." I followed his gaze and felt ice water flood my veins. The three figures cast shadows in every direction, except where their feet should have touched the ground. They weren't sitting around the fire. They were floating just above it. "Join us," the figure repeated, and now all three were turning toward us with movements that looked like film played in reverse. "The fire is warm. The night is cold. The hunt is beginning. Run," Mullins said quietly. "Right now. Don't look back. Don't question it. Just run." We crashed through the underbrush, abandoning any pretense of stealth or organization. Behind us, I could hear laughter that sounded like wind chimes made of bone, and voices calling our names though we'd never introduced ourselves. The trail back to the command post seemed to take forever, and twice I was convinced we were going in circles. But finally, we burst out of the tree line to find Trooper Burke still at her map table, coordinating radio traffic. "Team Charlie reporting," I gasped. "We found the missing hikers." "Excellent. What's their condition?" Mullins and I exchanged glances. "Dead," he said simply. "Have been for hours, maybe days. What we found up there, those weren't the missing kids anymore." Burke looked up from her maps. "Explain." "Trooper, with respect, you wouldn't believe our explanation," I said. "But I strongly recommend calling off the search until sunrise and evacuating all teams from the ridge immediately." "Based on what evidence?" Before I could answer, static erupted from every radio in the command post. Through the interference, we could hear voices, the same conversational tones we'd encountered around the fire. But now they were coming through law enforcement channels. "Team Alpha to command," one of the voices said, perfectly mimicking the cadence of police radio protocol. "We've found something interesting up here. Request all units converge on our position." Burke reached for her radio. "Team Alpha, confirm your location." "Join us," came the reply. "The fire is warm. The night is cold. The hunt is beginning." Every radio in the command post went silent simultaneously. In the distance, up on Witch Hazel Ridge, we could see lights moving through the trees. Not the steady beams of flashlights, but flickering points that danced and weaved like fireflies. And carrying on the wind, we could hear singing. Three voices, harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize, calling down from the darkness where Rule 1 had been broken and something ancient had begun to hunt. Trooper Burke stared at the silent radios for a full 30 seconds before reaching for her cell phone. No signal. The LED displays on all the electronic equipment in the command post flickered once and went dark. "Generator must have failed," she muttered. But I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Ma'am," Deputy Mullins said, "we need to evacuate this position immediately. Get everyone down to the main road and call for backup from Huntington. I'm not abandoning a search operation based on equipment failure and local superstition." The singing from the ridge grew louder, and now I could make out individual words in what sounded like Cherokee. But underneath the melody, something else joined in. A low humming that seemed to come from the mountain itself, as if the stone and earth were resonating with the voices above. "Trooper Burke." I tried one more time. Those weren't the missing hikers we found up there. The real kids are probably dead, and what's taken their place is hunting the search teams." Before she could respond, we heard footsteps approaching through the woods. Steady, measured steps that sounded like a military formation. Team Alpha emerged from the tree line in perfect single file, their flashlight beams moving in synchronized sweeps. "Team Alpha reporting," called the lead figure. It was Sergeant Reynolds from the state police, a 20-year veteran I'd met during training exercises. But something about his posture seemed wrong, too rigid, like a mannequin trying to walk. "Reynolds, what's your status?" Burke called back. "All clear on the eastern slope. We found some interesting rock formations that the missing hikers might have been exploring." Sergeant Reynolds stepped into the light from the command post, and I had to fight not to recoil. His face was perfectly normal, except for his eyes, which reflected light like an animal's. When he smiled, I counted too many teeth. "The formations are quite beautiful," he continued in Reynolds' exact voice. "You should come see them, all of you, right now." Deputy Mowens already had his weapon drawn. "That's not Sergeant Reynolds." "Don't be ridiculous," Burke snapped. "Reynolds, where's the rest of your team?" "Exploring the formations. They're waiting for you." The thing wearing Reynolds' face turned its attention to me. "Particularly you, Paramedic. Your grandmother would have wanted you to see them." Ice water flooded my veins. Ruby Morrison had been dead for 15 years. "How do you know about my grandmother?" "She visited these mountains often in the old days, before she learned to fear what she found here." The false Reynolds took a step closer. "Before she learned that some doors, once opened, can never be closed." Two more figures emerged from the woods, the other members of Team Alpha, moving with the same unnatural precision. They positioned themselves to block the access road, effectively trapping us at the command post. "Burke," Mullins said quietly, "I need you to trust me right now. Those aren't your officers." "Prove it," Burke demanded, but her hand was drifting toward her sidearm. "Sergeant Reynolds," I called out. "What's your wife's name?" The thing paused, its head tilting at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "Wife? You've been married to Linda for 18 years. She works at the DMV in Charleston." I kept talking while backing toward the tree line. "Your daughter Jenny just started at Marshall University. You coach Little League baseball on weekends." The false Reynolds' face began to shift, features flowing like melted wax. "Names are just sounds. Sounds can be copied. But memories can't," I said. "What did you and Linda do on your first date?" The thing that had been wearing Reynolds' appearance gave up all pretense of humanity. Its face elongated, jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. When it spoke, the voice came from somewhere deep underground. "We hunt now. The old agreements are broken. The barriers are down." Burke finally drew her weapon, but the three figures moved faster than anything human had a right to. They scattered into the woods with a rustling sound like enormous birds taking flight, leaving us alone in the sudden quiet. "What the hell was that?" Burke's voice shook. "That was what happens when you ignore Rule 1, Mullins said. "And now it gets worse." As if summoned by his words, lights began appearing all through the forest around us. Dozens of them, moving in patterns that hurt to track. Some flickered like fireflies. Others burned steady as highway flares. A few pulsed in rhythms that matched my heartbeat. "My teams," Burke whispered. "Those lights are my teams." "No, ma'am," I said. "Your teams are probably dead. Those lights are what killed them." The radio in my ambulance suddenly crackled to life, even though the ignition was off. Unit 47, respond to emergency on Witch Hazel Ridge. Multiple casualties. Immediate transport required. It was Hazel's voice, but Hazel never worked night shifts. I keyed the microphone. Dispatch, verify your location. Unit 47, I'm at the command post on Witch Hazel Ridge. Where are you? I looked around the empty command post where we stood, then back at the radio. Dispatch, I'm at the command post. You're not here. Static filled the channel for several seconds before a different voice came through. My own voice, speaking words I'd never said. Copy dispatch. En route to assist casualties. Multiple victims require immediate attention. Burke stared at the radio. How is that possible? The same way your sergeant had too many teeth, Mullen said. Whatever's up on that ridge is copying us, learning us, and when the sun rises, those copies are going to walk down into town and take our places. The lights in the forest began moving toward us, and I could hear voices calling from multiple directions. My own voice, Mullen's voice, Burke's voice, all calling for help from different points in the darkness. Vehicle, I said. Now. We piled into my ambulance, and I gunned the engine down the access road toward Highway 52. In the rearview mirror, I could see lights following us, keeping pace despite our speed. Some moved through the trees. Others seemed to fly just above the canopy. Where are we going? Burke asked. The only place in the county where Rule 1 doesn't apply, I said, taking the curves faster than safety recommended. Dr. Welsh's house. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of a farmhouse that sat in the middle of a cleared field, about 5 miles from the hospital. Every window blazed with light, and I could see figures moving around inside. Dr. Welsh met us at the front door, still wearing scrubs from an emergency surgery. Behind her, I recognized Hazel, several hospital staff members, and what looked like half the county's emergency personnel. Rule 1 protocol, Dr. Welsh said without preamble. When local law enforcement violates the midnight restriction on Witch Hazel Ridge, all emergency services personnel report here for containment and verification procedures. Containment? Burke asked. To make sure you're still human, Hazel said, appearing at Dr. Welsh's shoulder, and to figure out how to deal with whatever followed you down from the ridge. Inside, the farmhouse had been converted into something between a medical facility and a military command center. Tables held equipment I didn't recognize. Devices that looked like modified EMF detectors. Mirrors mounted at strange angles. What appeared to be several small forges burning in the fireplace. How many teams were on the ridge? Dr. Welsh asked as she led us to a side room. 4 search teams, total of 16 personnel, Burke replied. And how many made it out? Just us. Dr. Welsh nodded grimly. That means 12 entities are now loose in the county, wearing the faces of law enforcement officers. They'll try to integrate into the community, take over the identities of the missing personnel. She handed each of us a small mirror, no bigger than a compact. Look at your reflection. Tell me if anything seems wrong. I stared at my own face in the glass. Same brown eyes, same stubble, same worry lines that had developed since moving to McDowell County. Looks normal. Mullins and Burke confirmed the same. Good. The copying process takes several hours to complete. If they'd successfully replaced any of you, your reflections would show the substitution. Dr. Welsh collected the mirrors. Now comes the hard part, which is figuring out how to neutralize 12 shape-shifting entities before they spread beyond county lines. Dr. Welsh moved to a large map of McDowell County pinned to the wall. Your grandmother faced a similar situation in 1973. The solution required. She paused. Extreme measures. What kind of extreme measures? Before she could answer, Every light in the farmhouse went out simultaneously. Emergency battery lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in red emergency glow. "They found us," Hazel said quietly. Through the windows, I could see lights moving across the field toward the house. But these weren't the dancing fireflies from the ridge. These were vehicle headlights, multiple cars and trucks approaching in formation. "State police backup?" Burke asked hopefully. "At 3 in the morning? To a private residence they don't know about?" Dr. Welsh shook her head. "Those are the entities. They've learned to operate vehicles." The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the field, then voices calling out in the darkness. Familiar voices, belonging to the missing search team members. "Dr. Welsh, it's Sergeant Reynolds. We found the missing hikers. Everyone's safe. Trooper Burke, we need immediate medical assistance. Open up. We've got wounded officers." Dr. Welsh moved to a cabinet and pulled out what looked like a modified flare gun. "Everyone stay away from the windows. Don't respond to the voices, no matter how convincing they sound." "What happens if they get inside?" I asked. "Then we find out if your grandmother's final protocol actually works." Dr. Welsh loaded something that definitely wasn't a flare into the gun. "Because we're about to become the last line of defense between whatever's on Witch Hazel Ridge and the rest of the world." Outside, the voices grew more insistent, and I could hear footsteps circling the house. Something began testing the door handles with soft, deliberate precision. In the red emergency lighting, I caught sight of my reflection in a darkened window. For just a moment, it looked like someone else was staring back. Someone with too many teeth and eyes that reflected light, like an animal's. Then the pounding on the doors began, and Dr. Welsh raised the flare gun toward the ceiling. "Rule 7, she said grimly. "When all other protocols fail, burn everything and start over." Dr. Welsh fired the flare gun at the ceiling, and instead of fire, a thick white powder exploded across the room. The emergency lighting flickered as the powder settled, coating every surface with what looked like salt mixed with crushed bone. "Iron shavings and consecrated ash," she explained, reloading the weapon, "creates a barrier they can't cross without revealing their true nature." The pounding on the doors stopped abruptly. Through the windows, I could see the fake search team members backing away from the house, their movements becoming jerky and unnatural as the ash settled around the foundation. "How long will that hold them?" Burke asked. "Until sunrise, maybe." Dr. Welsh moved to a radio setup that looked military-grade. "Hazel, get me a connection to the Cherokee Nation Emergency Council in Tahlequah." "The Cherokee Nation?" I asked. "What do they have to do with this?" "Your grandmother discovered that the entities we're dealing with aren't just supernatural. They're specifically tied to violations of Cherokee's sacred sites. The mining operations that created these problems disturbed burial grounds and ceremonial areas that had been sealed for centuries." Hazel worked the radio controls while the rest of us watched the windows. Outside, the fake officers had stopped their human masquerade entirely. They moved like spiders, skittering across the field on all fours, occasionally rising to their hind legs to test the air with movements that resembled sniffing. "Counsel Elder Joseph Swimmer on Channel 7, Hazel announced. Dr. Welsh took the microphone. "Elder Swimmer, this is Dr. Patricia Welsh in McDowell County, West Virginia. We have a Code Cherokee situation involving multiple entity manifestations." The response came through clearly, despite the distance. "Dr. Welsh, we've been monitoring spiritual disturbances in your area for the past several hours. How many entities?" 12 confirmed, possibly more. They've compromised local law enforcement and are attempting to establish permanent presence in the community." "Understood. Has anyone attempted to contact the source?" Dr. Welsh glanced at me. "The source?" the original disturbance. In Cherokee tradition, entities like these don't manifest randomly. They're called forth by someone or something that has been feeding them energy over time, usually through repeated violations of sacred boundaries. I thought about the mining operations, the coal companies that had been digging deeper into the mountains every year. Elder Swimmer, what if the source is ongoing industrial activity, coal extraction from areas that were supposed to remain untouched? Then the entities will continue to grow stronger until the source is eliminated or contained. The elder's voice carried weight that suggested generations of experience with such matters. Is there anyone present who carries Cherokee bloodline? Not that I know of, Dr. Welsh replied. I do, said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at Deputy Mullins, who'd been silent since we'd arrived. My great-grandmother was Cherokee, Mary Bullhead from the Oconaluftee Band. Deputy Mullins, Elder Swimmer continued, Cherokee blood carries spiritual responsibility as well as heritage. Are you prepared to serve as a conduit for ancestral intervention? Mullins looked pale, but determined. What does that mean exactly? It means allowing the spirits of your ancestors to work through you, to communicate with the entities, to negotiate their return to the spirit world. The radio crackled with static before the elder's voice returned. But I must warn you, the process is dangerous. If the entities are too strong, they could claim you instead. Outside, the creatures had formed a circle around the house. They moved in perfect synchronization, like a single organism with multiple bodies. Their faces had given up any pretense of human features, becoming smooth as river stones, with holes where eyes and mouth should have been. How much time do we have? Dr. Welsh asked. Until dawn. Once the sun rises, they'll either retreat to await another opportunity, or they'll become permanent fixtures in your reality. Elder Swimmer paused. Dr. Welsh, is Ruby Morrison's grandson present? Everyone looked at me. Yes, sir. Morrison bloodline carries specific obligations in McDowell County. Your grandmother made agreements with my people in 1973 that bind your family to maintaining the spiritual barriers in that region. What kind of agreements? The kind that make you the only person present who can actually banish these entities permanently. The elder's tone became formal, ritual-like, but only if you're willing to honor the price your grandmother paid. What price? Dr. Welsh answered before the elder could respond. Your grandmother gave up her ability to leave McDowell County. She became spiritually bound to these mountains, serving as a guardian against supernatural incursions until her death. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You're saying if I do this ritual, I can never leave? Not never, Elder Swimmer clarified. But leaving would weaken the barriers your grandmother established. The entities would eventually return, and they'd be stronger. Through the windows, I could see the creatures moving closer to the house despite the consecrated ash. The barrier was weakening. How long do I have to decide? No tying, Hazel said urgently. Look at the windows. The glass was beginning to fog from the inside, even though the room temperature hadn't changed. But instead of random condensation patterns, symbols were appearing in the moisture, Cherokee syllabary characters that seemed to write themselves. They're trying to communicate, Mullins said. I can read some of this. It says, Brother Spirit, we seek passage home. The white mining wounds prevent our rest. The mining operations, I realized. They're not just disturbing burial sites. They're preventing the spirits from reaching whatever comes after death. Exactly, Elder Swimmer confirmed through the radio. The entities aren't evil in the traditional sense. They're lost souls, trapped between worlds by industrial activity that's blocked their spiritual pathways. more symbols appeared on the windows, writing themselves in the condensation. Mowens translated. 3 times Grandmother Morrison promised us passage. Her blood child must honor the promise. What promise? I asked. Dr. Welsh pulled out a manila folder I'd never seen before. Your grandmother's final report to the Cherokee Council. She promised that her descendants would serve as spiritual mediators when the mining activity reached critical levels. I read through Ruby Morrison's handwriting by emergency lighting. The document outlined a binding agreement in exchange for temporarily containing the entities in 1973. The Morrison bloodline would serve as guardians, using Cherokee rituals to guide lost spirits to their proper rest whenever industrial activity disturbed their burial grounds. So I have a choice, I said. Let these things spread beyond the county and potentially harm innocent people, or accept the responsibility my grandmother signed me up for before I was born. That's the situation, Elder Swimmer confirmed. Outside, the creatures had stopped moving entirely. They stood like statues around the house, waiting for my decision. I thought about my life in Charleston, my ex-wife, the career I'd planned that involved eventually moving to a larger city with better opportunities. Then I thought about Evelyn Simpkins, who'd trusted me with Rule 4. About Elmer Hatfield, whose reflection I'd helped restore. About Jenny Hatfield, asking for help in the middle of the night. What do I need to do? Step outside, Mullins said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I'll translate. Elder Swimmer will guide the ritual through the radio. And if it doesn't work, then we implement Rule 7, Dr. Welsh said grimly, and hope the fire department can contain the damage. I moved toward the front door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Welsh coordinating with Elder Swimmer about backup protocols, and Hazel preparing what looked like emergency flares. Caleb, Burke called out. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't listen to your warnings earlier. You couldn't have known, I replied, though we both understood that people were dead because outside authority had ignored local knowledge. I opened the door and stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, where 12 creatures that had once been human stood waiting in perfect silence. The cold October air carried the scent of dying leaves and something else. Ozone, like the aftermath of lightning strikes. I'm here, I called out. I'm Ruby Morrison's grandson. I'm listening. The nearest creature turned toward me, and for just a moment, its face showed traces of humanity. The features of Sergeant Reynolds, overlaid with something much older and more desperate. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, carrying the weight of decades of spiritual imprisonment. 3 times Grandmother promised us peace. The white mining wounds grow deeper. We cannot find the star path home. Through the open door behind me, I could hear Elder Swimmer's voice on the radio, beginning a chant in Cherokee that seemed to make the very air vibrate with ancient power. The ritual had begun, and there was no turning back. Elder Swimmer's chant filled the pre-dawn air, and I felt something shift in the world around me, like tuning a radio until the static cleared and the signal came through pure and strong. The creatures surrounding me began to change, their stolen human features melting away to reveal what lay beneath. They weren't monsters. They were people. Cherokee men and women in traditional dress, their faces marked with the exhaustion of decades spent wandering between worlds. Some carried tools that suggested they'd been craftspeople in life. Others wore the simple clothing of farmers or hunters. All of them looked lost. Deputy Mullins, I called back toward the house. Ask them who they are. Moen stepped outside, and I could see his hands shaking as he began speaking in Cherokee. The conversation that followed was halting. His language skills were rusty, but functional. After several minutes of back and forth, He turned to me. They're from the Oconaluftee settlement that was here before the coal companies, buried in the sacred grounds up on Witch Hazel Ridge in the 1800s. When the mining started, their graves were disturbed. They've been trying to find their way to the Nightland, the Cherokee afterlife, ever since. Why can't they find it? Mullins asked the question and listened to the response. The mining operations created spiritual wounds in the earth. The pathways they need to follow have been cut and rerouted. They're lost. Through the radio inside the house, Elder Swimmer's voice carried new instructions. The Morrison bloodline holds the key because Ruby Morrison learned to read the spiritual geography of McDowell County. She could see the original pathways and guide spirits to them. But I can't see spiritual pathways, I protested. You haven't learned how yet, came the reply. But the knowledge is in your blood. Your grandmother's experiences became part of your genetic memory when she bound herself to the mountains. One of the spirits, a woman who looked maybe 40 years old when she died, approached me slowly. When she spoke, I found that I could understand her, though she was using charity. Brother Spirit, the white men's machines have broken the star roads. We cannot follow the sacred directions to the place of rest. Your 3 times grandmother showed us new paths, but her death closed them again. I closed my eyes and tried to feel what my grandmother might have felt when she walked these mountains. At first, nothing. Then, gradually, I became aware of something like underground rivers, streams of energy that flowed through the landscape, connecting sacred sites and following routes that had nothing to do with modern geography. But the streams were broken, diverted, dammed up by what felt like massive spiritual scars in the earth. The mining operations hadn't just disturbed graves. They'd severed the energy lines that connected the living world to whatever came after. I can feel the breaks, I said, but I don't know how to fix them. Elder Swimmer's voice came through clearly. You don't fix them. You create new paths around the damage. Cherokee medicine teaches that when the original way is blocked, the spirits must find a different route to the same destination. How? By walking the new path yourself first, showing them the way through your own spiritual journey. Dr. Welsh appeared in the doorway. Caleb, the sun's coming up. If we don't resolve this in the next 10 minutes, these spirits will be trapped here for another lunar cycle. I looked around at the dozen charity spirits who'd been lost for over a century, wearing the faces of dead police officers because they'd forgotten their own. The weight of my grandmother's promise settled around my shoulders like a heavy coat. Tell me what to do. Walk the mountain, the female spirit said, switching to English that carried only the faintest accent. Show us the new star road. We will follow. I started walking toward the tree line, and the spirits fell into step behind me. What followed was the strangest experience of my life, hiking through McDowell County forests while seeing 2 different landscapes simultaneously. With my regular vision, I saw the familiar terrain of second-growth timber, old logging roads, and abandoned mine equipment. But overlaid on that reality was something else. A map of energy flows that pulsed like veins through the landscape, connecting sites that felt sacred even though most of them looked like ordinary wilderness. The spirits guided me toward the breaks they couldn't cross alone. The first was near an old strip mine where the earth had been peeled away in layers, exposing coal seams and destroying whatever had been there before. The spiritual pathway that should have led through the area was severed completely, its energy dissipating into the damaged ground. Here, I said, though I wasn't sure why. We go around. I found myself walking in a wide circle around the mining scar. And as I moved, I could feel the spiritual path reforming behind me. Not through the damaged area, but around it, like water finding a new channel around a boulder. The spirits followed, and with each step, they became more solid, more present, more like the people they'd been in life. We walked for what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. Each broken pathway required a different solution. Some needed simple detours around industrial damage. Others required more complex routes that spiraled through areas that had remained undisturbed. Finally, we reached a clearing on the eastern slope of Buck Mountain, where the sunrise was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. In my enhanced vision, this place blazed with spiritual energy, a nexus point where multiple pathways converged. "The Star Road begins here," the female spirit said. "Thank you, brother spirit. We can find our way now." One by one, the spirits began to fade, not disappearing, but becoming transparent, like people walking away through morning mist. As they went, they resumed their original appearances, Cherokee men and women in traditional dress, no longer wearing the stolen faces of police officers. The last to leave was the woman who'd spoken to me. "Tell your children, when you have them, that the mountain remembers those who serve it well. Your 3 times grandmother is at peace in the Nightland. She says you have chosen correctly." Then she was gone, and I was alone in the clearing with the sunrise and the sound of bird song returning to the forest. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. What's your status?" Hazel's voice, but the real Hazel this time. I could tell the difference. Something about the spirit's departure had sharpened my perceptions, made me more sensitive to what was genuine versus what was imitation. "Unit 47 to dispatch. Situation resolved. Returning to base." "Copy that. We've got coffee and breakfast waiting." I hiked back to Dr. Welsh's farmhouse, where I found the others cleaning up what looked like the aftermath of a small war. The consecrated ash had been swept into piles, and someone was boarding up windows that had been cracked during the night's events. "How do you feel?" Dr. Welsh asked as I approached. "Different. Like I'm seeing things I couldn't see before." I looked around at the landscape that now pulsed with visible energy flows. "Dr. Welsh, am I stuck here forever?" "Not stuck. Chosen." She handed me a cup of coffee that tasted better than anything I'd ever had. "Your grandmother lived a full life in these mountains. Had friends, found love, made a difference. The binding doesn't mean imprisonment. It means belonging." Trooper Burke approached, looking haggard but relieved. "Morrison, I owe you an apology, and I need to file a report that's going to make my supervisors think I've lost my mind." "Tell them equipment failure and false alarms," Mullen suggested. "Happens all the time in the mountains. They'll buy it easier than the truth." As we loaded into vehicles for the trip back to town, I realized that something fundamental had changed in how I saw McDowell County. The mountains weren't just geological features anymore. They were living entities with their own consciousness, their own needs, their own ancient purposes. And I was part of that now, connected to something larger than emergency medicine or personal ambition. My grandmother had chosen this responsibility, and now I understood why. Some jobs aren't just careers. Some are callings that echo through generations, binding families to places that need guardians. As we drove down from the ridge, I saw Witch Hazel Ridge in the distance, its golden autumn foliage catching the morning light. For the first time since moving to McDowell County, it looked like home. The Bone Lady came to me in a dream on Christmas Eve. I was sleeping in the cabin I'd bought on Laurel Creek, Ruby Morrison's old place, according to the deed I'd found in Hazel's files. The dream felt more real than waking. Standing in my grandmother's kitchen while she cooked cornbread and beans on an ancient gas stove. "You done good, grandson," she said without turning around. Her hair was white as mountain snow, pinned back the way I remembered from childhood visits. Took you a while to understand, but you got there. Did you know this would happen when you made the agreement with the Charity Council? Knew something like it would happen eventually. Mining companies don't stop digging just because they hit sacred ground. They dig deeper. She turned around, and her eyes held the same wisdom I'd seen in Elder Swimmer's voice. Question is, you regretting the choice? I thought about the past weeks since Witch Hazel Ridge. The county had returned to normal emergency calls. Heart attacks at the grocery store, car accidents on Highway 52, the occasional hunting mishap during deer season. But normal had a different meaning now. I could see the spiritual currents that flowed through every call, sense when something supernatural was stirring beneath ordinary medical emergencies. No regrets, I said, though I still don't understand everything. Understanding comes with practice, like learning to read vitals or start IVs. Grandma spooned cornbread batter into a cast iron skillet. The rules Hazel gave you, those were just the beginning. The real education starts now. What do you mean? McDowell County sits on layers of history going back thousands of years. Cherokee spirits aren't the only things that get disturbed when folks dig too deep. Some of what's buried down there predates human settlement entirely. The dream kitchen wavered, and I found myself standing in a place I'd never seen before. A vast underground chamber filled with structures that didn't follow any architecture I recognized. In the distance, something moved with purpose through corridors that seemed to bend in directions that shouldn't exist. What is that place? The deep places, where the really old things sleep. Grandma's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Your job isn't just guiding lost spirits home. Sometimes you'll need to make sure certain things stay lost. I woke up to find snow falling outside my bedroom window, the first white Christmas in McDowell County in 7 years. My phone showed 3 missed calls from dispatch, but when I called back, Hazel said they'd been false alarms. Funny thing, though, she added. All 3 callers mentioned hearing voices coming from the old Consolidation coal mine shaft up on Devil's Backbone. Voices speaking in languages they didn't recognize. I thought about my grandmother's warning and checked the rules list I now kept taped to my bathroom mirror. 7 rules for dealing with known supernatural entities. But maybe it was time to start writing Rule 8. The coffee maker finished brewing as I pulled on my uniform. Outside, my ambulance sat ready in the driveway. Emergency lights dark, but somehow expectant. The vehicle had started feeling less like transportation and more like a partner. Another tool for navigating the strange responsibilities I'd inherited. My radio crackled to life before I'd even turned it on. Unit 47, respond to 1847 Devil's Backbone Road. Caller reports hearing multiple voices calling for help from underground. Possible mining accident. But Devil's Backbone mine had been sealed and abandoned since 1952. Unit 47 responding, I replied, grabbing my gear bag and the new additions I'd started carrying. A bag of consecrated salt from the Cherokee Nation, a mirror blessed by Elder Swimmer, and my grandmother's journal, which I'd found hidden in the cabin's stone foundation. As I drove through the Christmas morning snowfall toward Devil's Backbone, I realized that serving as McDowell County's spiritual guardian meant the work never really ended. There would always be another call, another mystery, another choice between the easy path and the right one. Behind me in the rearview mirror, I could see the Bone Lady walking alongside the road, keeping pace with my ambulance despite the snow. But this time, she wasn't hunting. This time, she was watching my back.